Hello everyone, welcome back to day 5 of Advent of Code. Today's task is called Cafeteria and it goes the following. As the forklifts break through the wall, the elves are delighted to discover that there was a cafeteria on the other side after all. You can hear a commotion coming from the kitchen. At this rate, we won't have any time left to put the rats up in the dining hall. Resolute in your quest, you investigate. If only we hadn't switched to the new inventory management system right before Christmas, another elf exclaims. You ask what's going on. The elves in the kitchen explain the situation. Because of their complicated new inventory management system, they can't figure out which of their ingredients are fresh and which are spoiled. When you ask how it works, they give you a copy of their database, which is their puzzle input. The database operates on ingredient IDs. It consists of a list of fresh ingredient IDs, a blank line, and a list of available ingredient IDs. So these are ingredient ranges, and this is the blank line they're mentioning, and these are our available ingredient IDs. The fresh ID ranges are inclusive. The range 3 to 5 means that ingredients IDs 3, 4, and 5 are all fresh. The ranges can also overlap. An ingredient ID is fresh if it is in any range. The elves are trying to determine which of the available ingredient IDs are fresh. In this example, this is done as follows. Ingredient ID 1 is spoiled because it does not fall into any range. Ingredient ID 5 is fresh because it falls into the range 3 to 5. Ingredient 8 doesn't fall in any. 11 is fresh. 17 is fresh, and so on and so on. From the example, 3 of the available ingredient IDs are fresh. Process the database file from the new inventory management system. How many of the available ingredient IDs are fresh? So part 1 is pretty straightforward. All we have to do is check if in any of the ranges one of our ingredient IDs exists, and if so, we just mark it as a fresh. So let's start by actually parsing our input. I have an example input. So we will first get all of our ingredient ranges, and then we will get our ingredients. I will start by defining ingredient ranges variable, which will be an empty list, and ingredients, which will be also an empty list. Now we will open up our file with open input example as f. And what we can do next is the following. We will first create a for loop for ingredient ranges, and we will have a variable called ingredient range in ingredient ranges that will keep a track of the current ingredient range. Now, since this for loop will go for every line that exists inside the file, we know that there is one that's empty and separates the ranges from the IDs. So we can make sure that we break from this loop if the ingredient range equals an empty line. If so, we just break. And now all we can do is ingredient ranges dot append ingredient range. And to now just get the other to get our IDs, we just do for ingredient in F. Oops, my bad. Since you again want to read from our file, I made a typo here. Typo quote unquote. I used a wrong variable. Should have used the file. So this should just be F. And we can read again from the file in the same fashion, because as we are reading through the file, we continue from the last line we have been on. We have left off, and we just do ingredients.append ingredient. So now that once we have that defined, I will create a part 1 function that will in this case accept both ingredients and ingredient ranges, and we will keep a track of fresh ingredients in our variable fresh ingredients. It will be equal to 0, and we will increment it by 1 whenever we stumble upon a fresh ingredient. So in order to do that, we will start by iterating through all of the ingredients. For ingredients. And we will have a variable called isFresh. Now before we do that, I will create a function called isFresh. Or maybe not isFresh, maybe check isFresh. I think check if fresh. That sounds much better. We'll pass in ingredient and ingredient range, current ingredient range. So we will have, now what we need to first do is process our ingredient range, and we can do that by splitting it or splitting the input, well, the range I mean, on the minus or a dash, and we can cast it immediately to an integer by using a map. We of course need to remember to convert it back to a list. So we will have a list, then we will have a map. We will apply an int. To our iterable, which will be ingredient range dot split, like so. And now to check if our ingredient is actually fresh, all we have to do is compare if, for example, this 5 is bigger or equal than this, but smaller or equal than this. So how that will look like? Well, it's pretty simple. We do is start is less or equal than the ingredient and less and equal to the end. Since ingredient is a string, I will just cast this to an integer. And we will return true. Otherwise, we return false. Like so. And now here we can just call our function, check if fresh, ingredient and ingredient range. Did I do that correctly? I feel like I'm missing something. Yeah, whoops. For each ingredient, we need to check if it falls inside one of the ingredient ranges. Ingredient range in ingredient ranges. And now we can call our function, check if fresh. If so, if it's fresh, we do fresh ingredients plus equals 1, and we can immediately break out since we don't want to continue checking all the other ranges because we know that it falls into one of them. And we can just return fresh ingredients. And then here we'll just come, we will create a new variable again, part 1, that will accept ingredients and ingredient ranges, and we will print. So let's test if this works. We get 3, which is true. And if I would run this on my own input, we will get 652, which is the correct solution to part 1 on my input. Now let's begin with part 2. The elves start bringing their spoiled inventory to the trash chute at the back of the kitchen. So that they can stop bugging you when they get new inventory, the elves would like to know all of the IDs that the fresh ingredient ID ranges considered to be fresh. An ingredient ID is still considered fresh if it is in any range. Now the second section of the database, the available ingredient IDs, is irrelevant. Here are the fresh ingredient ID ranges from the above example: 3, 5, 10, 14, 16, 20, 12, 18. The ingredient IDs that these ranges consider to be fresh are 3, 4, 5, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. So in this example, the fresh ingredient ID ranges consider a total of 14 ingredient IDs to be fresh. Process the database file again. How many ingredient IDs are considered to be fresh according to the fresh ingredient ID ranges? So the moment I read the part 2, I thought to myself, this is extremely simple because all we need to do is construct all of the possible ranges and then just remove duplicates when we are doing that. use some data structure like a set, and then just check the length of it. And that was it. And so I decided to do that naive approach first time. On the example input, it worked perfectly. On my own input, I ran out of memory and my PC started lagging so much that I couldn't even close the program that was running it. So this is one of those problems this is one of those types of problems that is an optimization problem. So we need to find a way of making this code run fast enough so that it doesn't, well, crash, that it doesn't crash the whole PC. Usually the solution to the answer to these types of tasks, the optimization tasks, is always to use some form of math or to find a mathematical approach to the problem. And in this case, that is the intended solution, at least from what I have seen that others have and that people went for. And I decided to go the same way. So yeah, we can slowly start by writing our part2 function, def part2, and since now we can ignore the ingredients, we just need the ingredient ranges. So we will just do ingredient ranges. I will define a variable called all possible fresh ingredients. It will be equal to 0. For now I will return that. And I will just call it here all possible, so I don't have to worry about that later on. Part 2, ingredient ranges. Once we have that, first of all, what we will do for this whole thing to be simpler is we will get the what I called initially range boundaries. So those range boundaries will be the start and end plus 1, because we need to have inclusive, and because in Python when we are going through, or in general I believe it is for any for loop unless we include it, we want to include the last one, the last element. In this case, if we would have it from 3 to 5, the 5 wouldn't be included, it would be 3, 4, so that's why that plus 1 exists. So we will create a new function called def get range boundaries, ingredient range boundaries equals set. Now I'm using a set here because when we will be iterating through our ingredient ranges, we want to remove the duplicates. So because some ranges can contain other ranges, we want to get rid of that. For example, 16 to 20 and 12 to 18, these two ranges both contain 16, 17 and 18. So we can go ingredient range, in ingredient ranges, we will do a start and end again. Yes, start and end. We will do that. We will do range boundaries dot add a start, and as we have said, we want to add a end plus 1 because it is inclusive. Now one thing that is also left to do is we want to sort the list that we have. We will just do that in place by converting our set to a list and then calling sorted on top of it. So I guess now it would be a good time to explain how our algorithm would work. The upper boxes will be our defined ranges that are in an example input, which are gonna be these. And below we will have those range boundaries. So let's start by slowly going. First of all, I created the 20 boxes because the 20 is the largest range. and we start from obviously 1. So now let's start from a first range. We have from 3 to 5, so we can easily mark all of the boxes to have a background in that range. Now here we have a box 3, 4 and 5 selected. Now we can start with 10 and 14. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So they can have a background too. Now we can start 16 to 20, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Like so. And now, of course, we are left with 12 to 18. Since we already have 12 selected, which is 12, 13, 14, 16, 17, and 18 selected, the only one in all of those previous ranges that wasn't marked, quote unquote, is the 15. So we will just mark it here. Now all of these green boxes are what define our show how our ranges constructed would look like, or well, at least visually. Now below here we will be showcasing how those constructed boundaries would look like. For that we'll be using a red color, or whichever red they have. So let's start. We said that the start is all basically the same, but that we just add +1 to the range end. So how would that look like? We start from 3. I can define it stronger here. We start there, and then we just define 4, 5, 6, because 6 is the one we want. Now we have 10 to 14. We know 10 was here. And now we have 14, 11, 12, 13, 14, +1. It's going to be 15 over here. Then we start from 16. And until 17, 18, 19, 20, +1, 21. That's why I added that additional box down there. And we have 12, 11, 12, which is going to be right here. Oops. So just do this. Until 18, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 +1, 19, which is going to end up here. This is how our list would look like, how our boundaries would look like. Now what we will be doing with them is the following. We will be iterating through each one of these by selecting two first pointers, two first values. So let me just change a color for that so we can have it better. Oh, why didn't that work? Okay. And now, as we are iterating through the loop, what we'll be doing is, first we'll be checking for 3 and 6, then 6, 10, then 10, 12, then 12, 15, then 15, 16, 16, 19, and 19, 21. In this case, let's take an example 3 to 6, which is gonna be immediately down here. So now we have 3 to 6. What we will check is, as we are iterating through iterating through our, how would I call this? Range boundaries. We will also have to go through our ingredient ranges, and our initially first one will be 3 and 5. And once we have 3 and 5, I'm just gonna write it down here, maybe not directly below, 3, 5. We will have this as our start, and we will have this as the end. And we will, of course, have the we now of course have 3 and 6, so I'm just going to write it down, which is going to be our range start. We can call it like range boundary start and range boundary end. So now all that is left to do for us is now to check the following. We need to see, ignoring the range end or range boundary end, if this tree fits into this range. So doing that, we check not 3 minus 5. If this S is less or equal to the range boundary start, and if it's less or equal to the end itself. So now we are comparing the range boundary start to both of these values, and if that is the case, what we can do is then just do 6 minus 3, or in this case RE minus RS, and that will be our answer to how many ingredients are considered fresh, are valid, in this case, that fit into this range. Since, for example, this 3 to 6 covers this whole, then we get 3 ingredients, 6 minus 3. So that was basically the logic behind our algorithm. Now let's create a variable called range boundaries, which we will also call from a function. We will pass it ingredient ranges, and we will iterate through all of the range boundaries. Of course, since our range boundaries is defined as 3, 6, etc., as we have seen, we will take the index of it as we are traversing, and it will go from 0 up to the range of length of those range boundaries. And of course we want to do -1, since our pointer will be +1 inside this for loop, so we don't get the index out of range error. Now what I want to do is I want to create a new function that will be called def check if range is covered, and that one will accept the range boundaries, because we want to get our start and end from the range boundaries. We will pass in the index, and we will pass in our ingredient ranges. We will do start equals range boundaries of I, and end equals range boundaries of I plus 1. I'm sorry for that alarm. Let's continue. And because of this +1 is why we want to do length of the boundaries -1. Now we will go ingredient range in ingredient ranges, because now we want to check for all of them if our boundary is valid or not. And I will call a variable isFresh. And now, since we created this function before called checkIfFresh, we can easily use that function here by passing it this start, which is gonna be like our ingredient to check between, and we will just pass this ingredient range. And if it is fresh, what we will just do is return end minus start. Otherwise, we'll return 0. Now all that is left to do is we will just do all possible fresh ingredients plus equals the check if the range is covered. We pass in the range boundaries, we pass in the index, and we pass the ingredient ranges. And that should basically be it. If I'm not mistaken, we can now check by printing the output out. Of course, we will first test it with an example. Oh, we get 0. Why is that? I had a small bug. I forgot to add a return here, so that's why we were getting 0. But if you would now run it for an input example, we would get 14. And if I would run it for my main example, we would get this huge number, which is the correct answer. So that's it. I hope you guys have enjoyed. I hope you guys have also learned something. Any feedback is always appreciated, of course. And until tomorrow, I hope you enjoy your day and peace.